Live. Hello and welcome back to Crossroads of Cognizance, the one-stop shop for all things metaphysical and hopefully thought-provoking. Here on this show, we're going to come to you each Thursday, well, as much as possible, and bring together topics, trends we've been seeing from the healer's perspective, from the spiritual counselor's perspective, as Katrina and I both operate in these types of veins. And sometimes there's a collective shift that's happening that we can all experience together. So if this is your first time joining us, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button if you are on YouTube. If you're streaming with us from Facebook, you're going to want to like our page, or if you'd like to comment and join in on the discussion, you're going to want to click on the video. Otherwise, we won't see it. We'll have to catch it after. We do catch these comments after the show, so be sure to engage no matter when or what time you're watching. We have our first person. Hi, Stephanie. And then if this is not your first time watching this show, welcome back. If it is, we could start with some introductions. So over here on the East Coast, operating out of Crystal Cognizance at the moment, I am Dahlia Rose, and I service my community as a facilitator, conduit. I do energy work, readings, meditation, teaching different classes, hosting different guest teachers, and do all things that try to get folks back to themselves and ultimately on a more aligned path for their healing course. Everything is from the healing perspective here, as opposed to, future telling or things like that. We really want to empower people over here as much as possible. And I have a lovely co-host with me here.
Hi, I'm Katrina Raspold, and I am not nearly as busy as Dahlia is. Since we closed our shop last month, I've been recovering from COVID. And so what I have been doing now that I'm back upright again is basically spell work, readings, and cleansings for people. And that's been the most of my practice. I'm also working on the next book, looking forward to getting knee deep in that. So that's what I've been doing lately, and I'm just excited to be here. And there are all sorts of astrological influences coming up that Dahlia is going to tell us about. And I tell you what, buckle up, Buttercup, because it is going to be a fun and informative and enlightening ride.
Fun and informative, enlightening. And, there's this strange aspect to enlightenment that is kind of like a gut punch sometimes.
Yeah.
So, I don't know if the whole show can actually cover everything that's going on. I can attest to something new I learned about from a medical astrologer, actually. So astrology, if you've ever watched the show or sat down with me for 5 minutes, it's one of my favorite topics. And I use it as a tool for understanding other human beings, because we all have some, what I think are consistent qualities that we then go on to make our own unique way of interacting with the world from. So this is why I believe astrology is useful, not necessarily, again, from that future telling standpoint, but how do I address these things going on in my life? So anyway, I found out about a thing called, because I don't know what to call it, astrological placement called the moon being void of course. For as long as I've participated with astrology, I had no idea what that is. So I want to share what that is with you all today, because it's part of everything that's going on. It actually happened today. So the moon goes through each sign, and I'm sure as metaphysics and astrology becomes more popular, you may have heard, well, the moon is in this sign or the moon is in that sign, and you'll have different experiences as part of whatever's happening planetarily. And so with that, when the moon is void of course, it is not attached to a sign. it is free of influence, and this happens so every 2.5 days the moon will be in a sign, and then for that half of a day or a couple of hours actually, it will not be in any sign at all. It will just be disconnected. And I have to say, the feelings that come across when the moon is void of course, that's what it's called, void of course, has no direction. uh Disconnection, feeling unplugged, feeling spacey isn't quite the right word, but it can feel that way. It's as if you yourself on an emotional level can lack direction. And um in the spirit of blaming everything on the moon, I feel like I for the first time was conscious of that occurring earlier today for sure. So walking into the day with plan after plan after plan, and then arriving at this hour for the East Coast, it was about like I think 2:30, 2:45, and arriving at this place where all your plans feel like shit, and you're like, why am I even doing this? And then you kind of want to like walk away. And what I think I am coming to understand about when the moon is void, of course. So this is a great space, and this is kind of some of the conversations I've been having with others probably for 3 weeks now, is this space in between. So when the moon is void, of course, there is an opportunity for you to see what comes up, like what's there. And I think that allows for um like a diversification of what can come up. So you may have noticed this space before, but it may have had different themes. It may have had you questioning yourself and what it is you have going on in your life. You may have been in a place where the moon is void of course and you're questioning relationships, or anything that's coming up for you. When the moon is void of course, it's almost like an empty space, and the planets don't like empty space, the body doesn't like empty space, the universe doesn't like empty space, so something has to fill that spot. And it can be a little jarring if you aren't paying attention or you do have something to heal. And so earlier today, my sense of approval, I think my need for approval came up in my void of course place, and I was like, what is going on? And so anyway, that is one astrological theme that happened today, one of many. We're also in Scorpio season, so that's a great place for shadow work.
Absolutely. One of the things about void of the course that I've always found interesting is, I want to say, like you've pointed out, the nothingness of it. There is no influence. There's no planetary influence, and nature abhors a vacuum. And so we do tend to pile things and meaning onto that. And what's so important to remember, especially now that we're in this time after Samhain, which we just talked about in our previous video, is that we have to have those times when the fields are fallow, when everything is still. And that's hard for people, as Dahlia pointed out. And one of the biggest things I hear about challenges to meditation is getting ourselves and our minds and our thoughts to be still long enough to welcome in the wisdom of our ancestors and the wisdoms of our guides to override our thoughts and our busyness that we have. And so it all kind of ties together. And that's one of the reasons that Void of the Course is so hard, is that we want to fill it with meaning. We want to fill it with wisdom and chatter and thoughts. And it really is just a time of stillness. One of the things I've always said about astrology, and I love what you said before about how it's got to do with how you present your astrology form into the world. And to me, I've always said that your sun sign is your foundation of your house. And your moon sign, or excuse me, your sun sign is your foundation. Your ascendant or your rising sign is the facade of your house. What do people see? So you're building on one thing and you're showing the world something else. And then your moon sign is what's inside. So you can have a beautiful outside and inside it's hoarded to the max and has rats or whatever it might be. The outside isn't always what the inside looks like. And your foundation could be super, super strong and the house look really shitty. You never know how those three are going to interact together. And that's kind of how your sun, moon, and ascendant work together. But then you've got those other influences like void of the course and like the planetary placement. And that's the weather that's going on outside of your house.
Yes.
And right now, everything is super still in that weird eye of the storm way, so that it's a liminal space. There's no influence. And it just feels so weird that we start questioning everything. And what's especially interesting about void of the course is that kind of like new moon a little bit, is that it's about releasing. It's about letting go of expectation and just seeing what happens in that stillness. And that is a huge discipline that's really hard.
Yes.
And I think that there's so much that we can gain from this shedding and adapting that can happen in that stillness, but it's really scary to engage it.
It is, and at no level of development does that go away. I think it changes, and maybe it doesn't linger as much, but the challenge still presents itself. And this is kind of what I was alluding to with the moon being void of course, and it looking different for each thing. I think we have an opportunity here to observe not only like the ancestors and your guides and things like that, but what comes up in your body. You may start to experience pain when there is nothing there influencing you. When there is no weather outside the house. I love that analogy because it's the place where you start to evaluate, okay, can my house actually withstand other weather that approaches, because nothing is happening right now. So you start going around and you're like pushing on the house. Okay, is it sturdy? Or what about these not the cupboards, but like the window, I don't know what they're called, but like the flap on the outside. Shutters, there you go. Are the shutters going to fly off if the weather ends up in an air sign or what have you? And the other, like, as you're describing the analogy of the house, I'm going, okay, so my foundation is Virgo, my outside house is Pisces, and on the inside it's Libra. I need to do some cleaning. I definitely.
Well, and when we look at all of those signs that are going to give us influence at other times, when the moon is not void of the course, we are looking at elements of earth, air, fire, and water, and all of those can destroy a house.
Yes.
And yet we need all of those things to make a house livable. And so it's about finding that healthy balance. And when do we fix that roof, Dahlia? When it's not raining? When do we make sure our heating works? When it's not winter? I mean, anytime we're going to work with any of those elements, we need to work in the opposite time so that we're safe. And so void of the course it feels exposed and it feels scary, but it's actually a very safe time to evaluate, to take inventory, to pay attention to what is likely. Like you said, push those walls. Is this sturdy enough to get through the winter? Do I need to clean my gutters? What are my neighbors' houses like? Do I need to move to a different neighborhood? But just evaluation, just taking inventory and doing it in a safe and calm place where we're not allowing emotion to dictate what's happening. You might look at it and go, oh shit, my furnace doesn't work. There can be some emotion involved, but the answer to that is fix the furnace.
Right.
Yeah, it's a great time to just check your house, see how your house is doing.
And that piece of being present, right? I can attest earlier, I was not. I was like, it was almost like being in a vegetative state and then being woken up and being like, oh shit, where am I? Wait a minute, whose house is this? You know, and and then going around and checking everything and being like, you know, just off kilter. And so, you know, in this show, one of the things that we promote is that things will look differently for you. And I would love, like, I don't know when the moon is void, of course, next time, of course, I can look it up, but it would be interesting to see what your observations are. There's a lot to be said, because even when the moon is void, of course, we're still in a signs season, right? So like I said, it's Scorpio season, has been since the 23rd. And then the planets are still doing what they're doing. And the moon is just like, okay, well, la la la, for 2 or 3 hours, it's just gonna drift in nothingness. And the observation of what comes up is interesting. So alongside the moon being void, of course, you have other planetary influences kind of taking a long stroll about, like Mercury. Mercury doesn't shift that often. I think it's one of the slower planets. Or no, it's faster. It's the further out you go, the slower it goes. And so Mercury is in Scorpio right now. Astrologically, Mercury has a lot to do with communication. You know, you guys, we always talk about Mercury retrogrades, blah, 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 right? And how oppressive it is.
We're so articulate.
You hear me enunciate the blah, blah.
Blah.
And with Mercury being in Scorpio right now, it is a bit of it has an air of intensity to it. Like, we know, everybody knows a Scorpio who is intense. It's not an offensive thing. It's a thing. It's just a thing. It's just a fact. So intensity is what they can do best. And with Scorpio, with Mercury being in Scorpio, conversations can have an interesting and different tone. There's also an element of truth seeking. And so when you have, I had an opportunity to frame this moon void, of course, as in my slow panic of my house, I started to ask what the truth was. And you may be seeking the truth out in yourself, in others, with this tone of Mercury being in Scorpio until the 17th, November 17th. So one of the other things that is worth discussing is what does truth look like for you? Much like, and we said, much like what was typed in the description of the show, truth should be objective, but for the most part throughout life, a lot of the truths that we hold on are actually subjective. They are not universal truth. They are personal truth. And so I wanted to ask you, Katrina, how do you evaluate truth within challenging situations? Are there steps that you take?
Well, I'm a Virgo, and so anything I don't believe is just wrong.
Okay.
So it's super easy. It's so easy. You know, just no, that's wrong. I'll evaluate new things, and if it doesn't feel organic or correct to me, I just dismiss it outright. And so I kind of have an advantage with the foundation my house is built on, because I have no problem with considering something else to be wrong. It doesn't make me question myself into the ground like some signs do. I can definitely be convinced otherwise, and sometimes easily if I'm on the fence about something. Mm-hmm. There's varying levels of openness that I have on my truths. And for instance, with reincarnation, I'm one of the very few pagans who isn't completely sold on reincarnation as it's typically put out there. And I've talked about my theories before on that, which are a little bit different. And when I hear other people talking about past life this and past life that and this sort of thing, I don't dismiss it as wrong. And that just isn't the way it is, I dismiss it as that's not my truth. That's not what feels right to me. So I guess my truths are a little bit more, they're very personal, and I don't expect my truth to look like somebody else's truth. I have difficulty more so with the concept of universal truth. I don't think that there's a universal truth that applies to everybody.
Okay.
And so I think that that's how I kind of get around it and play with it a little bit, is that I embrace and love my truths to the point that when I'm having a crisis of some kind, my go-to coping mechanism is to start writing down my truths as I know them.
Mm.
And that gives me a foundation to stand on that helps me to feel more in touch with what I feel like I can depend on. But and then there's certain things, as I said, that are just negotiable to me, that if I have a conversation with somebody that's particularly compelling, I can be pulled back around to different ways of thinking. So I don't know if that's normal or if that's okay, but that's kind of me when it comes to truth. Eric, on the other hand, is a Scorpio, and he is dusted just like Stephanie Goff is. Um, I know she corrected to busted, but dusted worked so well. Um, Eric is a Scorpio, and therefore his truths are absolute. There is no reason that, as he would put it, and this is his common phrase, any reasonable person would disagree with him. And so it's very confusing and difficult and personal to him if I have a different opinion about something. An example is we were talking about afterlife.
Okay.
And he is just absolute. The soul goes on. I will be something different. I will join a major collective. I will become reincarnated as something else. My soul will continue. My soul will go on, just like Celine Dion's heart. And for me, I one time, probably 18 years ago, made the mistake of saying to him, I am open to the idea that nothing happens. I'm open to the idea that we are a biological organism, that we are given this one precious, exciting, miraculous life that we get to live. And when we're dead, we're dead. I'm open to that thought. To this day, that man believes I don't think there's an afterlife. Because I said I was open to that idea. And every argument we have, he throws, well, you don't even believe there's an afterlife. How can I trust anything you? No, let me take you back to that conversation. I said I was open to that thought. Eric's truths are his truths. And in order for him to shift any truth, I have to plant a seed and wait for it to grow and become his idea. So that's just one example. I'm sure you have some too, of the way that different signs and personalities engage ideas of truth. That was way too long of an answer for the question.
No, perfect. Because you brought us to a very important place, which is, where do I start? You know, as folks are moving through Scorpio season, of course, there's always different ideas of how to tackle truth, how to evaluate these things. But Katrina brought up a great point. Why don't you make a list of your truths? I mean, now Virgos, I love the idea because it involved a list. I love my list. But if writing things down is not your deal, then you could record your feelings. I mean, I recall a time when I didn't have anybody to talk to. That's no longer the case now. I have people like Katrina and other lovely friends in my life who are actually willing to listen to me, so I don't have to listen to myself alone. And I thought to myself, why don't I record this? Because I feel like a crazy person. I feel like I'm not hearing what I'm saying, and what's being reflected back to me in conversations is not what I think I'm saying. And so I recorded just probably like 5 minutes of me just emoting as if I was talking to the person that I was in conflict with. And I went back and I listened, and it was like an audiobook for a diary. And it presents itself now as I'm talking to you all as an opportunity that is similar to that list, you know, that that piece to be able to hear what's behind your voice that you may have missed. What would come up when the moon is void, of course. You'll be able to hear it in an audio recording or in a list that you're making. Alongside this list is an opportunity to look at your values too. What's important here? You know, so not a long answer at all. At all.
We all have, and you brought this up so well before as well. This is going to shift for us. None of us are immune to void of the course. None of us are immune to planetary influence. We're all going to have times that we are more sensitive, that we are more open, that we are more solid in our beliefs. And so don't imagine that our truths are going to stay the same all the time. And that's a sign of growth. If we are solid in our truths to the point that they never change, that's a pathology that we need to look at. It's never that our truths are just that good. It's that we have stopped integrating new information into our worldview. And everybody can probably look back on themselves 10 years ago and 15 years ago and look at ways that they were not possibly as compassionate of a person. Maybe they weren't as good of a listener. Maybe they weren't as generous with themselves as they should have been. We can all find ways of how we identify ourselves in the world that are open to shifting as we grow and mature and learn new things. So it's really interesting when we do go back and read old journals. I know that I started online journaling in 2001. And it was interesting because I wrote a soap opera column at that time about General Hospital and One Life to Live. And every now and then I would mention something about my personal life that was pertinent to the conversation. And I started having all those people write to me, well, what happened with Delina's school thing that was going on, and things like that. And so I developed what was called the non-soapy journal, which was my online journal. And I really just diaried everything out. Eric fucking hated it. He said every modicum of our life is out there for anybody to read. Some things have to stay personal, but I just would just word vomit. And this was before there were blogs. This is before there were, those things.
Oh, that's how you make it.
Yeah, it is. So that continued for many, many years. And when I go back and I read those entries now, I think, my God, you were so whiny. All you did was bitch and complain nonstop when there was so much around you to be grateful for. And at that time, I'm raising 4, 5, 6 kids of different ages at home. I was exhausted all the time. I was trying to also run this really amazingly successful website. And so I had so many things going on and I was really bitter. I had a lot of anger in me. And I'm grateful now to not be in that place. And one of the reasons I can be not in that place is because the people I surrounded myself shifted. And now I'm around people like you who cause me to stop and think from a compassionate place about the things that I'm going through. And it really lifted the vibe of who I am. And so it's not just your house, it's the neighborhood that you live into that's going to affect how you present in the world.
100%. And, having been deeply impacted by you and others, I can completely identify the same. One of the things that you brought up earlier too, is between you and Eric's nature, I think maybe like unintentionally, is you are a mutable sign, so you're Virgo. And he is a fixed sign, which is Scorpio. And Colleen was mentioning here, there is that, I guess, Mark
is her husband.
Okay, so her husband being a Taurus, it's whatever when he comes up with with things, but or when she comes up with things, but it's awesome when they agree. Again, Colleen, you're dealing with a fixed sign.
Yeah,
that's all there is to it. Now I'm sorry, Colleen's asking a question now. Did you say the moon is the outside and the ascending is the inside? I think
reverse that.
Okay.
So the ascending is the outside and the moon is what's happening inside. So an example, I'm a Virgo, so that's my foundation. Everything I do will be from a position of Virgo. However, what I'm going to show you guys is Scorpio, my rising sign. And so that's strong and determined. And boy, do I know what I'm talking about. But inside, I am this chewy, mutable little Cancer sign that's a soft, chewy center. And so, yeah, that's quite a mix of Scorpio, Virgo, and Cancer. It just kind of, anytime you put lots of water and lots of earth together, which is what I've got in my sign, you're going to get mud.
I have lots of earth, and like one water sign. The rest is, yeah, and one air sign. That's why I'm like, I'm pretty dense.
The Eric is consumed with fire and air.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That is somebody who is out to burn things down.
Yeah, given any opportunity.
You know, with Scorpios, right? Relationships are an interesting thing. And being in Scorpio season, they also call this cuffing season. I think I've been seeing around. Like I don't follow up on a lot of those kinds of conversations, but Venus is also in Scorpio. The planet Venus is in Scorpio right now. And so where people may have felt okay with superficial connections, they may be wanting more now. I think is a very interesting headspace to be in, heart space to be in, and this makes us highly emotional. So when we get into the moon being void of course, so we get to enjoy Venus in Scorpio until November 16th. When the moon is void of course, and it will be several times throughout these coming days and weeks, watch what comes up around love as well. You know, what are you yearning for? What are you Scorpio is all about what they call the phrasing is I desire, right? And so what's coming up for you, maybe it isn't just about love, maybe it's about community and that kind of connection, but you won't want anything to be superficial at this time. You'll want to go deeper, and I would say move slowly in case when you get out of Scorpio season you're like, nah, never mind.
Well, also remember that it's not just people that have astrology charts. So your marriage or your relationship has a, I have a Scorpio marriage because I was married November 13th. My business started the end of March, so it's really about when you initiate something new, and that's something you don't want to do during void of the course, is start new things because you need the influence of the planets around you in order to know the nature of what that is. And I've noticed that people who are born during the void of the course, they tend to have difficulty with attachments. They tend to not attach to people, thoughts, and places with the same tenacity.
Okay.
That people born outside of the void of course do. It's like they themselves are still and keep their energy inward quite a bit.
Interesting.
Yeah, same thing for like a business. You don't want to have a business that isn't attaching to people and ideas. So you wouldn't want to start a business during void of the course.
Now everybody's going to be like, oh God. Be looking up to see when the moon is void of course. Yeah, I honestly, I always forget about that piece of other things having their own astrology. Much like businesses, like you were saying, I actually started this business during a Mercury retrograde and was very concerned, but it was the only available timing.
Well, and there's ways you can use that to your advantage. For instance, if you're starting a business that is revisiting ideas you've had in the past or things you've done in the past, you can create an anchor in that past point with the RE of the retrograde. You're going back to your past and collecting something from the past to bring forward. So
Nice.
that can really be helpful. Stephanie has a great question.
Yes.
Usually, void of course is not listed on an astrology chart with most systems, but you can research it on an ephemeris, or there are different programs online that can look up for your birth date that you're concerned about to see if the moon was void of course.
And I'm sure like nowadays there's quick Googling. Was
Yeah.
the void of course? Or what in this year, when was the moon void of course? And if it came up, then you know.
And for those of you that don't know this, I know Dahlia does, but in the olden days when the earth was cooling and the dinosaurs roamed, we used to have to buy these big, thick books called ephemerises. And they were huge. And they literally had the planetary placement for every day in a period of 10, 20 years. And so you had to have all of these stacks of these giant books if you were charting astrology. And we got very excited when there were templates we could use for astrology charts that already had the 12 marked out. And all we had to do was draw in the planets and the dot and the little glyph for the planets. And you use that ephemeris in order to tell exactly how many degrees into the pie wedge that glyph was going to go. It was a colossal pain in the ass. And that's why most really amazing astrologers now have a computer that do that shit.
There's a book called The Only Astrology Book You'll Ever
Yes, it's purple and this big.
Yes. And I remember getting my hands on that book several years ago and being so excited, only to basically throw the book against the wall as I tried to hand calculate my chart before I met my astrologer. Oh my God, it was a nightmare. And I cannot.
There's a little yellow one by Levi, and I can't remember what it's called. Levi is the author, but it's a little yellow one, and it's an amazing one as well. But I love the big purple book that you mentioned, the only astrology book you'll ever need. But it also, if I'm not mistaken, had the templates in the back that you could put on the copy machine and Xerox them out.
It did. It sure did. And I was just like, who does this? Who picks this as a profession, as an astrologer? Like, don't.
And you know what? Unless you're Sylvia Brown or someone like that, you are not going to make significant coin doing this. So it's not even a profession. It's just a really ridiculous, stupid, odious hobby that we had. And it was just so when you're charting somebody's astrology chart, number one, there's human error. You will screw it up somehow, some way. And when you're done, you've put a week's work into doing this and use compasses and protractors.
Yep.
It was insane.
No bueno at all.
No, all bad. Technology good.
There are some things like, we might be scared of technology sometimes, but this is not one of those places where it's like, oh, this is terrible. I think it's the best those programs have been the best invention.
I'll guarantee you that the first time any astrologer who did a manual chart came across a charting program and saw that it matched theirs, and then saw that the part it didn't match, you screwed up, was whispering witchcraft under their breath because it was so amazing.
Yeah, I bet. Listen, when I had that feeling when I found my astrologer, I was like, you know what? You got it. I will see you here, friend.
I got a guy.
Oh man. Astrology is really, this is why when people are like, it doesn't work, it's a science. Maybe some folk, like, when you put it in the newspaper and you're like, okay, horoscopes for the week. No, it's not going to tell you your whole life. And you can probably figure out ways that it doesn't apply to you. But when you get an eyeball deep into it in the ways that we're talking about, it really becomes a tool for healing. It becomes a tool for reflection and direction. Because now, like Katrina was saying, if you were born during the moon being void of course, and you felt this sense of helplessness or directionlessness, now you know why. And when you know these kinds of things, I'm not a huge fan of why, but when you know what, then like Katrina was saying, what you can do opposite that. And time doesn't exist. So like she was also saying, you go back and pull forward some energy that is useful to you. So.
Know your strengths also. If you know anything about your astrological sign, you know what the gifts of that sign will be. And you can pull in the gifts of your sun sign. You can pull in the gifts of your ascendant and say that, I know that Taurians are very into their creature comforts. They love to be comfortable. I know that Taurians have a beautiful voice and gorgeous eyes. I know that Taurians are stubborn as all get out. And so you can use that tenacity in order to get through the tougher times. You could use the love of creature comforts to say, you know what, I'm going to settle in my recliner with my cup of cocoa and turn on the massager and the heating pad in the back and just get cozy. Play to your strengths at all times.
It's funny, I was having a conversation with a Taurus like 2 days ago, and they were like, well, I think I should be like, I need to figure out how to communicate with people because while I think I'm a realist, my partner says that I'm a pessimist. And I guess I think I'm just upsetting people and I need to communicate differently. And I was like, but this is who you are. And I said, has there ever been a moment where your pessimism has gotten you out of trouble or has prevented you from getting into trouble? And of course they were like, yeah, of course. Well, maybe don't apply it so liberally, but don't throw it away. Like Katrina was saying, yes, absolutely know your strengths. Don't try to be like other people, but magnify the parts of you that work and know when to apply them. And you'll know pretty quickly based on
Use
that.
it as your superpower because
Yeah.
we need all of those people. In the world, we need every single one of those people. And they all have their strengths, they all have their gifts that they give to the world, but they all have their challenges too. And so one of the challenges she knows is that they are prone to negativism or to pessimism. And maybe evaluate, does this feel authentic or am I just worrying? And it's the people that worry that do steer us out of trouble sometimes, that can foresee challenges that a complete pessimist or optimist might not be able to see.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't have to be all or nothing. I mean, you can use your gifts without insisting that other people ascribe to the same way of thinking or co-opt onto what you believe or what you think you need. We can contribute without having it take over.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And speaking of contributions, with this season being Scorpio season, we also know that Scorpios are insanely helpful. They're able to see sort of deeper and past the superficial. And so this season, you may feel compelled to go a little bit deeper to help others in their journey of going deeper. This is a great time for that. And then there's another planetary aspect sort of influencing these things. And I think it'll be interesting to see how it plays out for everybody. But Mars has moved into Gemini. So while it's Scorpio season and you're maybe feeling more helpful, you're wanting to go deeper, you're wanting to connect more, Mars in Gemini feels like tasting everything and like attaching itself to nothing. So you may have these sort of conflicts going on. You may find that you're like, I want to try something completely off the wall and different and seem like a crazy person to everybody around you. And I think that Scorpios can carry a great deal of compassion. And so there's also this loving embrace of that energy too. There's so much going on that seems conflicting, but there may be a lot of opportunities, don't you think?
What's exciting about Mars in Gemini is that Mars is the planet of war and action.
Mm-hmm.
It's the get shit done. It's the go in and just wreck shop planet. And for it to be in Gemini is the twins. So it has two minds. So this means that we've got basically your life wanting to go to war with itself. And so it's a great time for making really, how can I put it? If you needed motivation before in order to make some heavy changes, this is a great time to do it.
Yes.
And this is a wonderful time to ask for forgiveness instead of permission, and to just, you know, I'm moving to Oregon. I'll see you all later.
Yeah. 100%. Geminis are super resourceful too. They'll figure it out.
Yeah,
Once
they're
they
chatty
forget.
fucks too, man.
They're what?
Chatty.
Yeah.
They talk and talk and talk. There's a lot of communication going on there, inside and out.
Yes. So, and you brought up meditation challenges earlier. Meditation is a conversation. It is you trying to communicate with something, and people are like, oh, well, I have trouble being silent. This is the season to not do that.
Yeah.
At least until 2023. Like, you will not be quiet. So you might as well talk it up. Talk it up with your body, with your spirit guides, with your ancestors, with your organs, with
Well, and the rest of the year is just batshit with planetary influence. It's as though we have this huge bucket of collision of all of these planets and celestial bodies that are going to be influencing them. So it's going to be a rocky time.
absolutely.
Excuse
And
me.
and at the heart of it all, like we started out with the conversation, there's an opportunity for you to find your truth and all of that. Let that be your north star. If there's anything where you're feeling confused, keep going back to truth. Keep going to that list. Keep asking the questions. And I think taking time to yourself is really important too. It's um, another bit of conversations that I've been seeing come up for folks in like readings or interactions. This desire for community and to get other people's opinions is starting to sort of pull away, and there may be this feeling of free fall and not recognizing the opportunity that when you extract other people's ideas and influences, all you have left are the planets. All you have left is you,
Mhm.
and that is where the truth is. It's not going to be in what others think.
Yeah. You know, post COVID, we were so isolated that once the restrictions were loosened a little bit, people tended to crave attention and crave companionship and community. And so they really started grouping together a lot. Excuse me. And now we're kind of at a place. I've been doing a lot of readings for people. That has been a huge trend lately, is people getting readings. And boy, that hermit card is coming up a lot. The island card is coming up a lot.
Mhm.
And people are needing to back off a little bit and spend some alone time. And we tend to be afraid of that now because we spent so much time isolated that we're just wanting those connections. But we've got to remember that that alone time and that quiet time is just so important to decision making.
Absolutely. Um, finding yourself, knowing yourself, and knowing that you've been through so much, like Katrina was saying, being isolated, not being able to touch or
Oh,
connect.
hi, I'm back. I went away. My camera glitched for some reason.
Oh no. Um, no, all good.
You were saying.
Knowing yourself is one of the greatest ways to navigate through a lot of the changes that we're talking about, the space of truth. But you also have to know that yourself will change, yourself will evolve, yourself will need stronger tools, or to go back to basics after having gotten through all the tools, like the list, like recording yourself. Another way to get to that place of truth is to change rooms, change your scenery. Wherever you had your issue, go into a different room, see if you have a bit more of a clear head in that space. If your thoughts are racing, grab something heavy to bring yourself back into your body and to help you ground. Drinking rooted tea. These are all ways to kind of get yourself back to yourself so you can get on that path of truth and reason.
Take a shower.
Yes.
Uh,
Great.
just let everything flow away with you. If you're really feeling out of sorts, as though your life isn't working, or you don't know why everything feels broken, rearrange the furniture in your house,
Mm.
because that will make you literally walk a different path and it rewires your brain to be more open to new ideas and new ways of maneuvering. And as always, even just if you can't get to a shower, if you're at work or something and you're feeling overwhelmed, just go in the bathroom and wash your hands. And our hands are receptive and projective both. And so as we wash them, we break those connections to others. We break the
Mm-hmm.
connection to the energy of work and the energy of obligation. And that helps us get back in our body and be ourselves again.
That was such a big thing in COVID, right? Washing your hands. And
Yeah.
as you're saying that, I'm listening to stories of in my head back then of how people's work performance improved and how they didn't feel so like oppressed by work. I mean, some of this had to do with being working from home for some folks, but I wonder now that you're saying this, how much was involved with the hand washing and making sure that everything was clean and sterile. Like we just weren't holding on to things the same way at that time. I
That's
mean,
true. And also with working from home, the big fear of employers was that people would be distracted, that they wouldn't be focused on their work, that they wouldn't have the performance level that they normally did. And what they found instead is that performance levels actually went up when
mhm.
people were at home. And, think about that office environment and how often you're having to stop because somebody a few desks over is asking you a question or wanting to interact with you or just hanging out at your cubicle with the cup of coffee, just looking at you and expecting you to acknowledge. There's so many distractions in the workplace, and often we can focus even better at home. But yes, washing your hands frequently definitely repositions you back to where you need to be.
Yeah, well, and I suppose this is you can attest to this now, right? Like
Mhm.
being at home, you're probably getting more spell work done and more readings done. Would that be the case?
I'm actually pretty much working 7 days a week now, but because I can focus and I'm not having to deal with the retail side of things, I can usually get it done in a few hours rather than having it stretch out into my whole day. So it's working out pretty well. I'm having to create some boundaries for myself
Oh,
as
okay.
far as, when I'm working and when I'm not, what time of day I'm going to cut off and say, it came in at this time, so I'm going to do it tomorrow. I'm the kind of person that if something comes in and I know, hey, I can get this candle work done in 20 minutes, half an hour, I'm just going to go ahead and do it. So I get up in the morning with a clean docket, and I'm just piling too much on. So I am having to put some boundaries on there. But yes, I can absolutely get more done at home than I could at the shop. I
Yeah.
thought the opposite. I thought, okay, I'm going to leave in the morning. I'm going to go to work. These are my work hours. So I'm going to isolate my work to this time. And it just turned out that the hours filled themselves. There was rarely a day at the shop that I could just sit. Anybody who came in to visit me knows I was working just all the time. So now I have more leisure time in between, which I appreciate.
Yeah. That's awesome. That is definitely awesome. Um, as far as so speaking of getting your work done, and I'm sure you're doing sort of some like personal spiritual things too. How are you? How are you navigating that personal spiritual development or personal spiritual connection piece amid the like boundary setting, working
Mhm.
7 days a week? I feel like that's a question that most folks have.
I'm just getting there now in the last day or two because we had the house moved, from one house to the other, and that ended up taking about 2 weeks to get that house settled, completely moved, cleaned, and then that house settled into this house.
Mm,
And then only a couple weeks after that was when the store closed, which was huge in terms of integration and figuring out how we were going to make the house and our apothecary that we have here at the house functional for what we have to do. And that would have taken about 2 weeks, except that we got COVID in the middle of it.
Mm.
And Eric was literally patching up the wall between the two. We had two rooms to the shop, and he had to close off the door he had made. When he got COVID, he was drywalling, and that's why we thought that he just had inhaled gypsum from the drywall, and that's why his throat was sore, because he hadn't been anywhere. He had been to Home Depot, he had been to Walmart. That was it.
Mm.
And Eric is a Scorpio, so he ain't hugging on people and shit. He has a 6-foot radius bubble around him all the time, not just during COVID. So there's no reasonable way he would have gotten COVID. And he did. And so I tested positive 3 days after he did. I'd been negative until that time. And it just knocked us both out hard. I got it worse than he did.
Mm.
I'm still having coughing and difficulty from it. But that slowed down my roll to the point that we just got the house settled last Friday night.
Wow.
And then we had stuff we were doing over the weekend. Excuse me. So I've really just had the last few days where I haven't been completely consumed with either being dead in the bed or unpacking and situating things and getting them where I wanted. So this is the first week we've had of what I would call something close to normal of what our life is likely to be. I've done a little bit of spirit work during this time, but not as much as I would have liked. The fatigue is still pretty bad.
Oh.
And I wanted to get back to work. And so I've been using a lot of my energy for the remote connections.
Mm-hmm.
So in between, I'm still pretty tired, but I'm getting there. And I've really found that this place is extremely conducive to spirit connection. You know, there's some places that are really good for it and some that aren't. I have found that I don't do great magic in the desert. Some
Oh.
people do. And I lived in the desert for many, many years. The high desert is, I lived in Victorville, California, in that area for around 8 years. And then we went up to, then we went to Edwards where the space shuttle lands. And then we went to Idaho, which is the lower part of the high desert. And I had to work twice as hard for any magical push anytime I was in the desert. But when I'm in the mountains or when I'm by the ocean and the negative ions are there, I don't have to push nearly as hard.
Mm.
And this particular space is really conducive to my energetic flow.
Nice.
So it's easier for me to connect, which I appreciate. And I look forward to what comes next with that as I'm settling into the new normal of being semi-retired and figuring out who I am in that space, because I'm going to have to rewrite some of my truths.
Mm.
And Eric is really struggling too, because the community around the store was so much a part of his personality and his social construct that it's been very, very hard for him to let that go. Now, I don't have a problem with it because I'm a hermit anyway. I love being alone. And so I'm still in contact with the people I love. I still see people, talk to people through social media. So I don't feel like I lost anybody, but he's very visual, very connected. He's not on Facebook. He's not on Instagram. So that's been a real struggle for him to find his space socially without the stimulation of the store. So it's been interesting. It's a huge life change, and we're both trying to figure out how we fit into that as a couple and as individuals. And our 25th wedding anniversary is next weekend. We were going to go away for that time, but we've both been so sick that I think we want to wait till we feel better.
Yeah.
But it's quite an adventure. We've never lived like this before without kids to manage or a business to handle. This is our first time to just be us, and we're pretty excited for that.
That's a completely new construct. I mean, on
Yeah.
so many levels, most people deal with maybe one level, maybe two. And here you guys are muscling through. Wow. What I think I heard you say, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that, and I think this is important for people to hear, that it's okay for this to be the experience. When life is turned on its ear, you're making those connections as you are, working on other people, you're not, it's not so much a need for setting aside altar time in the
Mhm.
morning and, your come to Jesus moments. It is like, okay, I already know that I need to be a pure, clear vessel for this work to be, what it needs to be, and the land will make up the difference.
Mhm.
And so first it is Katrina taps in, connects, and that happens, the work gets done, then there's a disconnect, and that's the place where you would have sat for 15 minutes in front of the
Right.
altar or done the veneration work. Or does that make, is that
It's very, very close. That's I really love the way that you put that. And what it really is that the spaces in between for me right now in this new space, surrounded by altars on every flat surface,
mm,
being forced to be less active and down, every space has been holy. So I haven't needed to force myself to go into that place of, okay, I've got to do this cleansing, so I'm going to take 15 minutes and meditate, so I'm in a sacred space. I'm finding I'm in a sacred space most of the time.
wow.
And there's also so much restfulness here. We just had rainstorms, which was really helpful,
Mm,
that I just feel much more rested and engaged and here and plugged in. And so I've just found that access works better for me now without the stresses of, okay, I've got to drive this far. I've got to figure out what we're doing for food. I've got to, and just the nonstop, I call it like Pez of the store, of people, constantly walking in one after another with crisis, and
yeah,
having to manage crisis after crisis after crisis after crisis. It's hard to stay in your own body when you're managing the crises of, 20, 25 different people in a day.
yes,
And I found it easier to stay in my body here, working by remote, which allows me to be more present and plugged in when I am working with clients. So it's just been a real blessing. I all around. It's what I wanted all along. And as a Virgo, I'm very excited to see that I was right, and it works. So,
well, guys, there's a lot of opportunity coming up in Scorpio season. And the topic of today's, it was a little convoluted in the description and a little convoluted during the conversation, but we were driving towards this place of truth, and we've had like many many opportunities here to engage with that, with what truth looks like for you, being able to make lists, being able to record, shower, shift your place, shift your space, become aware, be available when the moon is void, of course, to just do nothing. Don't start anything, just exist and trust the process. And if you're catching this on the replay, check into your chart, leave us some comments so we can see, were you born in during a moon being void, of course, and during the next one, let us know what's going on with you. How did you handle it? Now that you know what it is, what difference has it made for you? But as always, we love you guys, love all the engagement. We didn't get to all the comments, but we did see you, Heidi, Stephanie, Colleen, and everybody, Kat, Gina, Cole. Thank you all for participating live. And thank you for the community. And we will catch you next time on Crossroads of Cognizance. Have a great night, everyone.